and all the bands that have worked with him, who are legion. I've been saying for years, every best heavy record of the year was whatever record Kurt Ballou produced that year.
Which, by the way, just to give a few quick examples, like that Gaza release, No Absolutes and Human Suffering, recent Code Orange releases, the Last Darkest Hour record, so many records that I love came out of there. What else?
The best sounding Torch record, One Every Time I Die record, Nails, Trap Them. Everyone who's worked with him and who is asked about the experience of working with him said, okay, he asked you, what are you trying to get this to sound like? What's kind of the general sonic palette? And then he'll just go to work. Like, he just understands the dynamics at a technical level of what that's going to entail. So you imagine his ability to do that for bands that he's not in. And when he turns that lens on the dudes he's been around forever, it really comes to bear in how good this record sounds. And it can't be underscored enough. Like, if they didn't get to record at God City on their home turf and they didn't have the master of detail getting it just right, this record would be half of what it is at best. If you get into this record at all as a new fan of heavy music, because this is different from like metal or hardcore or whatever. This is like that unclassifiable category of stuff that is heavy but sounds amazing. It's like really great art. Tone, it's like tone worship. You have to talk about the associations with other important, unique, super creative, heavy bands that they have. It's hard to talk about Converge without talking about Cave In, an equally unique, important, innovative band that sounds great. Steve Brodsky, who's the main dude in Cave In, was the bassist in a very early iteration of Converge, and they've remained close friends. And most of the song Effigy features Cave In members.
It's a shocking amount of guest appearances and collaboration on this record. You see a punk record with guest collaborators on it, and I don't know about you, but I get a little nervous when I see that. Like, I'm going to end up with a pop punk We Are the World single. So on this record are members of Dysphere, Blacklisted, Himza, Neurosis, Genghis Tron, like really contributing to different parts of this, including, speaking of Neurosis, Steve Von Till being on Cruel Bloom, which is a dramatically different song than the rest of this record, and still it somehow having the same feel as everything else, like it really feeling like it belongs there.
Well, it was you that said before this episode, I don't remember which member said it, but that they viewed Jane, You Fail Me, and No Heroes as sort of a trilogy.
Yeah, Kurt said that.
And this was their way of kind of breaking out of that. Like, what comes after this? Like, what could we possibly do? We've been a band for a really long time at this point. What do you make of all this? What do you think of these templates? How can we make this better? We talked about that a good bit on the Björk episode. let's bring in almost a 360 feedback tool so you can tell us who we are. And if you follow Converge after this record, the next record was created explicitly in contrast to that model. It's like, okay, we have a refined sense of who we are now. We want to make a pure Converge record. But this was, let's figure out what the Converge sound is by people in bands that we admire, who have influenced the Converge sound, and who the Converge sound has influenced, who we really respect and have spent time on the road with and all that.
Speaking of being on the road, one of the things that still blows my mind about the time that Axe to Fall came out was Converge was on the Metalocalypse tour. Adult Swim rules everything around me, I guess. But I mean, they had put together a Metalocalypse tour, which for the uninitiated, first of all, I'm sorry. Second of all, Metalocalypse was a crazy cartoon that was on Adult Swim.
Oh, he must be 200 degrees. Oh, this. I'm taking off my shirt off.
Where are we?
We in the South, the birthplace of the blue. Well, it's too hot, and I'm taking my shirt off. My God, I have let myself go.
You have put out a few pounds, Rooney.
You're not supposed to agree with me.
That tour, the Metalocalypse tour, sticks out to me because that included a cartoon band called Death Clock, who was headlining the show. The other members of that tour were Mastodon and High on Fire. First of all, I remember feeling like Converge doesn't really belong on that tour. It's like they're a bit too earnest to go on a tour with basically the gorillas of metal. But even reading interviews at the time and really seeing this perspective, like you just get another dose of Jacob Bannon being very like, I take people at face value. So he talked about, yeah, it's pretty weird to be on tour with a cartoon band, but, and this is definitely true, the musicians behind Death Clock are incredible. In fact, Jacob Bannon said, they were the most talented musicians on that tour, period. They knew that they were going into an environment where kids might not accept the type of music that they're playing. I mean, they're pretty different from the other bands on that tour.
Do you remember the reception that they got when we saw them at the Tab? They started super duper early and they played a 30-minute set. And the kids were chanting, "You suck." It was hostile.
As much as I want Converge to be the biggest band in the world because they deserve it as people, I also never want them to play in a venue that holds more than 1,000 people at one time. It needs to be loud and scare you, and you need to only have room for enough people to really, really love being there.
Yeah.
Because when we are, it's amazing. But like at the same time, their first headlining tour for Axe to Fall after that, so in April of 2010, was a little bit more in the vein that you would expect. Coalesce, Harvey Milk, Gaza, Lewd, Axe, and Black Breath.
Oh my God.
Right?
Oh my God. First of all, I miss Harvey Milk so much. Second of all, that's like when those bands post flyers of stuff from the 90s where it's like you paid $6 to see all those bands at a Mountie Hall or a Vets Hall.
At the Masonic Lodge.
At the Masonic Lodge outside of Las Vegas.
So I never owned a CD copy or a vinyl copy of this record, but at least when they released the CD, the booklet had a different piece of art for each individual song on the album. And Jacob Bannon already is doing a bunch of the artwork, which, by the way, I love this artwork so much that I've got the Axe to Fall cover hanging above my desk.
Yeah, like
in
a
my
40
home.
by 40 flag in your home office.
It reminds me to be heavy. But yeah, just like the completeness and thoroughness of the artistic vision of this stuff, that there's a different piece of mixed media artwork for each individual song that's made. by Jacob Bannon to represent the feelings he's trying to portray in the songs. And even he himself, if nothing else with a heavy band, usually the lyrics will kind of betray you and disappoint you a little bit. Converge songs are emotional roller coasters, just kind of unveiled, but they're given with such conviction. Not only do the lyrics sound poetic, but secondly, it's really easy to find Jacob Bannon explaining every single lyric in every song that he's given. It was trivial for me to find a track-by-track explanation of his vocals for Axe to Fall, and then his actual delivery of it. Like, we've talked about the production of his voice, but he's said on more than one occasion that basically studio sessions are him screaming until he literally bleeds, and he throws himself into his artistry and into his part of it. Like, he doesn't take a backseat to anybody else, even though I didn't necessarily expect to draw this comparison. Like, we talked about Björk really physically giving herself to vocal performances that you can see in studio sessions that have been videotaped, and Jake is the same way. That earnestness completes this picture. Like, they really care about what they're doing and they deliver it with such professionalism. Just the fact that they've stuck with it long enough to get to Axe to Fall and then long enough to keep progressing after that. There is so much daylight between them and almost any other band that's been inspired by them.
So, counterpoint a little bit to the Jake thing. If you're like me and that makes you, the thought of facing that head on maybe makes you a little cringy, that's where Nate is a really beautiful foil, especially on the choruses, right? And I love Doom Riders. I love his band so much because it's just like biker in a leather vest beat you up stuff. It's just like super tough and rad. Jake is in a higher register and Nate has this guttural Roadhouse vibe. He comes through with like the tough, repetitive stuff, especially in the choruses. And it's there in Dark Horse. It's in a number of places. It's in Reap What You Sow, the minimal punchy stuff. We reap, we sow, we mourn who we were. So just in Jake's hands, that can be a little emotive, but it takes on a new toughness when Nate says it. The best example for me is Cutter, right before they get to the last two songs that make the record take on a whole new bent. Cutter is where they tie a bow on everything that's come before it in the record. And it's a song about what you think it's about. Nate and the dude from Undertow and Himsa have the refrain, "One way down, no way out."
Yeah, so you spoke of the turn kind of at the end of the record, and we've talked about Cruel Bloom just a little bit earlier, which is, again, a dramatically different song.
An answer to the question I've never asked, what would a Converge blues song sound like?
Good.
Good.
And then you get to Wretched World at the end. Now, one thing we haven't said directly, but should be pretty noticeable as you started listening to these songs, they're dense. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons the pacing is good is because a lot of these songs are like less than 2 minutes long and they still have movement to them, right? So we've gone through a number of those types of songs, and then as we start to get to the end, we hit that slow kind of blues song at the end that has a nice build up, and then the last song is 7 minutes long. And so it's important to point out that the length of that is in direct contrast to the rest of the record.
To be perfectly candid, didn't make it that far in the record for a long time. It was like 2 or 3 years after I'd started listening to that record a lot that I discovered Cutter. So I hadn't even made it that far and was like, oh, here's the pick me back up. Here's like the chorused Converge song of them all here at the end of the record. And it just wallops you. So I didn't discover Wretched World at all for a long time, which is kind of embarrassing to say I love this record so much and realize I've never really listened to it all the way through that much. But it happens. I'm only human. I love the vocal melody of this song. I love a good late night song where it really comes alive in the stillness of the night. And this is a great example of that. Cruel Bloom is too, because it's real bluesy. But the Genghis Tron impact of this song is really nice because there's the kind of ethereal, surreal, spooky vocal touch that they add. And then a thing that I never thought I would hear in a Converge song is that synth layer. And like, that'd be a weird, almost certainly failed experiment for most bands of their ilk, but it's so tastefully executed, again, because of Kurt, that it sits just perfectly in the mix where it adds dimension and texture rather than being like, here is synth in a hardcore band song.